Now that the rear flank of Albeit has been purged of enemy activity, my cameraman and I have taken refuge outside the west boundary. We are attempting to evade the close-quarter combat that is raging on the far side of the village for ultimate control of this vital crossroads. Macrolens is bringing you these images from behind the lifeless hulk of the Iranian T-62, which nearly toppled the marine defenses. Although our situation is still dire, a spark of hope has been kindled. Fresh ground troops have been spotted emerging from the barren plain. Astride them is the platoon of tanks that are now advancing on Sultan's Dagger Ridge from south of the Wadi. Albeit stirring, I can only wonder if this new development is timely enough to amend the battle's climax. Reporting from northern Iraq, this is Cybernet.
An influx of fresh armor and infantry onto the field at Albeit notwithstanding, the situation facing the Marines of 4th LAR is indeed perilous. In a last-ditch effort to wrest control of the road junction before the battered garrison's newly arrived compatriots can intervene, the Iranians unleash an onslaught of infantry upon the unstable picket defenses. Even though the charging soldiers suffer grievous losses, their mass assault nevertheless overwhelms the meager contingent of Marine recon scouts guarding the south perimeter, therein allowing shock troops to close ranks on the naked trench. For the brash leathernecks, not even their closest ally, the Cloak of Darkness, can protect them from the rigors of hand-to-hand combat against potentially insurmountable odds. The time is 03:36 hours. With the all-out infantry assault of the Iranian South Pincer appearing to have drawn the undivided attention of the Marine garrison, the segregated platoon of soldiers of the East Pincer set in motion their own assault plan. Having just lost his ammo feeder to sniper fire, the No. 2 medium machine gunner leaps from his overwatch role and races ahead of the main body of troops intent on establishing an intermediate gunnery position. Seconds later, 1st and 2nd squads crest the dune and bound forward with dogged determination. Their interim goal is the Sandy Knoll, which is the last potential cover prior to the village outskirts. Fully aware that the 2 Marine LAVs parked outside the north wall will attempt to counter their advance with machine gun fire, 3rd Squad remains behind to provide suppression. Despite a range to target that affords little chance of success, the AT soldiers unleash 3 RPGs in the direction of the vehicles, merely to serve as a distraction. However, one warhead actually strikes Fox 1's missile array, which forces its gunner and the C2 crew to abandon their weapons and button up. As a result, the Sand Troop continues on towards their destination unimpeded. The task of providing covering fire along the village periphery no longer a necessity, the No. 2 medium machine gunner drops to the sand and begins laying down a volley of bursts at the known Marine sniper positions atop the last standing multi-story buildings. Despite being unable to discern specific targets, he nevertheless engages in cursory grazing fire at the freight office roof, which wounds Captain Rick's adjutant and summarily curtails the activity of Team Mongoose. Further forward the dune at the knoll itself, one of the last surviving Sand Scouts peers out from behind his sandy sanctuary. Armed with a Dragunov rifle and a revitalized confidence, the unit sharpshooter scans the plain for a prime target of opportunity. Back at the South Pitch Trench, the main assault continues to escalate in intensity and consequence. Shuttling into a concealed position behind the westmost building, Coyote 1 joins the repulsing action in an effort to aid the beleaguered scouts of 2nd Platoon, who now have the Iranian shock troops within their very midst. With input from Team Snake, this augmentation to the defensive retort helps blunt the otherwise irresistible force behind the enemy assault. Conversely, every weapon within the medieval bastion is committed to sniping the wavering Marine picket defenses. As such, the overall effect creates a paradox that balances victory and defeat on the razor's edge of chance. As with any heated contest, fate must ultimately intercede, and in this case, it does so via a sequence of minor events. With the prospect of success squarely within their sights, the shock troops assail the trench by way of a two-section leapfrogging action. Unfortunately for this band of Iranians, the Marines are not dissuaded from task by a coordinated barrage of small arms and hand grenades. Focusing on and promptly decimating the fixed anchor link of the squad, the scouts allow the point team the opportunity to gain access to their open ditch. Comprised of only 4 survivors, these shock troops immediately enter into proximity combat with Bravo team. However, the melee is short-lived. With each side suffering a single casualty, the Iranians panic and break upon realizing that they are unlikely to be reinforced by ensuing waves of infantry. Bolting from the furrow and running for their lives, the 3 remaining men of the hapless assault team are cut down by the 2 extant members of Bravo team. Out on the open plain, the left flank of the U.S. tank platoon finally attains visual contact with the south bend in the Wadi, and, more importantly, with the outer fringe of the infantry duel. Due to their angle of attack, however, they refrain from engaging the rear flank of this intimate fracas for fear of inflicting collateral damage on 2nd Platoon. Undaunted, they proceed forward in search of alternate targets. Concerned that the deaf T-62-75 is unaware of enemy armor on the battlefield, the Iranian command staff dispatches the BMP crew to warn them of the approaching threat. Yet, the effort is in vain. Seconds later, the number 4 Abrams detects the heat signature of the stranded tank from beyond the Wadi apex and promptly pumps an AP shell into its hull. With this event, not only has the reservist tank company been completely eradicated, all traces of Iranian heavy armor have been expunged from the desert floor.
Upon dispatching what was essentially the last armored thread in close proximity to Al-Bazir, I ordered the platoon to turn its guns on the small arms fire coming from the fortress towers. Bombarding the citadel with high explosives was the only real contribution we could offer the recon troops, who are struggling to hold the objective. After a mere 3 shells, the bastion suddenly fell silent. The enemy command and control element was obviously more concerned with self-preservation than with providing ancillary support to the assault. Therefore, I elected to hold fire and preserve our munitions. As we proceeded onward, we came upon the burning wrecks of a pair of T-62 tanks. Since it was important that we coordinate our actions with the infantry platoon in the Wadi, I halted our advance and signaled them for a situational update. Their coded response indicated that they were still in transit to their designated staging point. We refrained from further such radio traffic, so as to keep their existence a tactical secret. As for me and my tanks, the momentary pause allowed us time to dress our ranks, and properly survey the field.
After having had their assault rebuffed by the diminutive Marine picket force, the South Pincer is faced with yet another setback. Their company commander has been killed in action. This loss of leadership throws the heavily depleted Iranian troops into disarray. Recognizing this, 2nd Platoon's lieutenant attempts to temporarily remove himself from the clamor of the ongoing firefight in order to signal Captain Ricks of his own critical 40% reduction in human resources. Whilst leaving the trench, he falls into the crosshairs of the Sand Scout sniper, who's been waiting for just such an opportunity. Although on target, the attack inflicts only a minor wound on the junior officer. To the trained ears of Mongoose and his spotter, the repeat of a Dragunov rifle is unmistakable. Reacting to the resonance, they locate the culprit behind the knoll. However, just as Mongoose takes aim, his counterpart resumes concealment. Not skipping a beat, the Marine marksman adjusts sights and assails a secondary target. As for the Grenadier, he takes aim at the medium machine gun by tracking the incoming stream of tracer rounds to a point of origin halfway up the face of the dune. With remarkable accuracy, he puts an end to the transient menace in one fell swoop. Owing to the mayhem taking place across the battlefield, the two Iranian infantry squads segueing to the knoll arrive without incident and promptly drop to the sand in search of any cover or concealment they might find. Witnessing their safe onset, 3rd Squad leaps into action and pursues them down the slope, hopeful that their own jaunt will prove no less fortunate. With the sum of the infantry having departed the Crown, the MV headquarters tank is now free to maneuver and begins a trek to the dune crest, where its crew intends to become something of a nuisance.
كنا قد تم مجهز تكنولوجيا الرؤية الليلية مماثلة لتلك التي للأمريكيين قد مهمتنا.
Had we been equipped with night vision technology comparable to that of the Americans, our mission might have stood a reasonable chance of success. But, as it was, brute force alone proved insufficient. The defeat of the entire south prong of the task force meant that our primary objective of reaching Kirkuk was now a lost cause. At this stage in the battle, our only immediate offense was that of a single T-62 on the sand dunes. Our South Pincer assault group was nearly decimated. They suffered 50% casualties in the attack and were in the process of retreating back into the Wadi Depression, oblivious to the obligatory orders being spewed over the radio by an equally insensible commandant. Only the infantry platoon of the East Pincer seemed to be intact and capable of pursuing the assault. Realistically, we would be lucky to survive the engagement, given the enemy armor that was now attempting to dominate the field. In preparation for tank-to-tank combat, the balance of the mobile MV tanks, all 4 of them, rallied behind the ridgeline to await the coming dawn. Only with the morning's light and the benefit of higher ground was there any hope of victory against the Abrams and their crews.
With no intention of allowing the Wadi infantry to regress back into the dry wash unmolested, Coyote 1 continues to harass the faltering Iranian assault troops while simultaneously foiling a potential anti-tank attack. Meanwhile, Captain Ricks and the sniper teams refocus their attentions on the escalating threat from the dunes.
The enemy withdrawal from the battle line came at a very opportune moment. Not only did it alleviate pressure on the 8 survivors of 2nd Platoon, it set the stage for events to come. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the remnants of the Iranian assault group experienced a command vacuum, caused by the loss of their CO. Although chaotic, they did manage to regroup after a short lull in the fight. The negative effect of their tenacity and resilience was still quite evident, even to the men inside the armor-plated Coyote. In an effort to shore up our fragile picket defense against a possible second attack, the MTVR crew accompanied the wounded platoon lieutenant back across the dirt road. Unfortunately, a number of enemy soldiers had other plans. They reappeared over the Wadi lip and engaged the group as they made their way to the southeast trench. Forced to defend themselves with bonding fire, my Marines entered into a brief but intense skirmish. For the second time in as many minutes, the LT was targeted from long range by an Iranian sniper. This time, the shot merely grazed his helmet. In the end, all but 1 man made it safely into the trench. Although the enemy combatants inflicted yet another casualty on our already depleted ranks, the cost to them was even greater. To their grave misfortune, the Iranian assault group was so consumed in their desire to breach our picket line, their situational awareness suffered with regards to the presence and proximity of Company D.
Formed exclusively as an auxiliary unit for the campaign in Syria, the Marines of Company D were stationed in northern Iraq at the outset of Iranian hostilities, and thus available to assist 4th LAR in their hour of need. Once again in the right place at the right time, the men of 3rd Platoon have finally reached the abutments of the land bridge within mere yards of the unsuspecting Iranian assault troops on the other side. Whilst they quietly gather their breath and prepare to go over the top, a runner is sent out to their companion tanks on the plain with a message for their ears only. Upon receiving confirmation that the platoon's clandestine status is still intact, along with details regarding their pending counter-assault, Lieutenant Phillips raises his eyes skyward to a distant horizon that glows ever more golden with the rising sun. Free to deal with the enemy tanks without the corollary effect of close-quarter infantry combat, he ponders the onset of daylight and its ramifications. Not to be excluded from the fight, the crew of the crippled BMP return to their iron carriage armed with the knowledge that they are now the only Iranian armor west of the ridgeline. With Marine tanks not far off, they endeavor to utilize the last of the IFV's heat rounds before giving up the ship. Targeting the freight office, their initial shell impacts the building, forcing its occupants into cover. Realizing that they are sitting atop a ticking time bomb, the command post Marines commence to abandon the groaning structure. An instant later, an ensuing shell detonates near the roof cap, which incapacitates the grenadier. However, the building remains stable. The beneficiaries of said event, 3rd Squad of the East Pincer, join their comrades at the sandy knoll without incurring so much as a single casualty during their short excursion down the face of the dune. On the other hand, Snake is still in the game and acts to fill the void. Spotting the squad's NCO engaging in the oft-fatal gaffe of battlefield voyeurism, he dispatches the unwary soldier with casual grace. Carefully scaling the reverse slope of the dune in order to avoid becoming mired in the shifting sands, the headquarters MV tank finally attains defilade on the village below. Acquiring line of sight on Fox 1, the T-62 belches an AP round that devastates the intrepid LAV and forces her crew to withdraw. Regardless of having already exhausted its firepower, the demise of Fox 1 spells an end to the most valuable combatant on the field at Albeit. Yet, even in destruction, it provides one last measure of service, a warning to the C-2 of the previously undetected threat. With the Marine command vehicle having escaped their view, the Iranian tank crew turn their sights on the freight office and join the bombardment. Ironically, the initial high-explosive shell impacts the structure, yet it is the adjoining building that shudders and caves in. Concealed inside this dwelling is a medley of 5 estranged Marines from the Heavy Weapons Platoon. By virtue of the auspicious hand of fate, they survive the incident and crawl from the ruin, having suffered but a single casualty. In the meantime, Captain Ricks and his adjutant escape the besieged freight office and angle for the only available command post left to them, that being the all-important C-2. On this note, the East Pincer begins their assault on the settlement from the sandy knoll. With 2nd Squad performing overwatch, 1st and 3rd head for the northeast outskirts, completely unaware that the 5-man heavy weapons command team is hidden within the trenches. To the south, the situation is wholly contradictory. Refreshed and mustered for battle, it is 3rd Platoon that takes the fight to the Iranians. Scrambling over the divider, the Marines move with all due diligence to establish a presence on the bridge overlooking the East Wadi, and the preoccupied troops of the South Pincer gathered within it.
caution to the wind, I've relocated to the interior of Albeit with news of AT-62 that is now attacking the village from the most unlikely of locations. Wait, what was that? A civilian vehicle has just entered the village from the north. It's traveling at a high rate of speed and appears to be heading for the battle line. Oh my gosh! A horrific explosion just occurred, possibly as far south as the bridge. Because of our impaired visibility, it's impossible to say for sure. However, I can tell you this much. There were an awful lot of Marines in that general vicinity. What a terrible turn of events. Just terrible.
Emerging from the last vestiges of the night's murky veil, the insurgent element once again rears its ugly head for one last desperate foray into Albeit. Laden with a massive naval artillery shell, a simple sedan and its two-man suicide squad breach the Marine defenses, hell-bent on altering the battle's likely outcome. For Captain Ricks and his troop, the car bombers are an unwelcome revisitation of the same evils that plagued 4th LAR on their trek to Objective Keystone. Unprepared for such an eccentric scenario in the midst of conventional combat, the Marines fall prey to what may very well be the battle's most defining and caustic moment. Here too, on display, is the reality and the pitfall of warfare in the modern world.
كنت أشاهد حكايات مكافحة الظاهرية على صاحب قصة قناة الإنترنت.